Good morning, folks. Welcome to the Hot Shop this morning. In studio, we have Peter Hermansson as our visiting artist. Peter Hermansson is a Swedish glassmaker who is highly regarded for his contemporary use of traditional Graal or aerial techniques. Following his formal studies at the Orrefors National Glass School, Hermansson spent 2 decades developing a graphically expressive graffiti style. Notably, Hermansson's unique graphic illustrations are transferred into the surface of his glass vessels through art etching techniques, creating powerful visual narratives. Peter will be working here in the Hot Shop from the 1st through the 5th of July. If you're interested in hearing more about the artist, please show back up here on Sunday between 1 and 2 for our artist talk. And with that, we'll get into the techniques that we are working on today. Over on the left-hand side of the studio, in the left bench, we have Peter, we have Gabe in the black hat, and we have Eden, who's helping out with everything. Here in the center bench, we've got Nick, another Museum of Glass team member, and he is working on getting his, looks to be color overlay ready and up to temperature. Good morning, folks. Welcome to the Hot Shop. My name is Jeremy. I'm the MC this morning. We're just now getting started working on a Graal technique with our visiting artist, Peter Hermansson. It's kind of a new technique to the folks here in the Hot Shop, new to me as well, so we'll be learning this together. So this morning, what we're working on is it's a technique called a Swedish overlay. What we do when we begin that technique is we create a color cup with multiple layers of color. That's what they're doing over on the left-hand side of the studio. And once the artists are happy with that color cup, they're going to attach another bubble at the very apex of that and invert the color cup as they roll it around the bubble. It's kind of a little difficult to describe. It's much easier to watch. And so as we watch our artists get all of these colors ready to overlay these bubbles, we'll discuss the technique. Here at the center bench, Eden has moved into the rewarming chamber, or we call the G hole or the glory hole. That G hole runs at 2,300 degrees for the time that we're here in the studio. You contrast that with our crucible. We have two crucibles here on the hot shop floor. They're the big silver tubs on either side of these rewarming stations. And each of those crucibles holds 1,000 pounds of molten glass at 2,100 degrees, 24/7. We never shut them off. They just keep a-running. So back at the center bench, Eden is working on heating up that color bar and shaping it into the right proportions. She will then present that color to the left bench. In the interim, we've got Nick Davis with his white color bar deep in that rewarming chamber. And when he gets that up to temperature and the right shape, he will present it here to the left bench, where Gabe will add that white layer to the outside of the color bubble he's working on right now. With that bubble inverted, Nick will present the white color. Diamond shears, Gabe snips that away, and we'll begin shaping and pushing that white layer down over the yellow bubble that is currently attached to the blowpipe. And get our initial shape on that, and then it's going to get back into the rewarming chamber for a quick all-over heat, impart some more of that thermal energy into our form. There he goes, back into the rewarming chamber. All right, so here in the left bench, we continue to work on that, that cup form that will be used a little bit later. And you can see on the center, moving to the left, we've got Eden coming back with that, that separate color bar. She needs to get a little more heat into that, so she's stopped off there at the rewarming station in the center bench. And here on the left-hand side, we continue to work those color cups that will be used a little bit later. So here at the center bench, Ben has created a small bubble on the end of that blowpipe using a puff and cap technique. He's going to shape that bubble up. And it looks like we're probably going to add a layer of color to the outside of that. So you noticed here at the center bench, Ben is using that metal tool called the jacks, made out of stainless steel. And we use those to shape up the outside, inside, and otherwise shape our forms. You notice here at the center bench, Ben is essentially just babysitting that clear bubble of glass off the end of his blowpipe. He's letting that set up and develop a little structural integrity so that when we add the color bar to the outside of it and roll it down, that bubble stays inflated and doesn't collapse or distort under the heat and pressure of that new glass. You see that bubble being turned vertically, and with Eden heating up that color bar, she's going to get it back to Ben. He's going to attach that right to the end of that clear bubble. Using those diamond shears, he'll snip that away from the pipe and begin the process of rolling that color around the outside of that bubble form. And with that initial color application, we'll get back into that 2,300 degree rewarming chamber. Grab a little bit more heat and continue to push that color down around that bubble. Over here on the left side of the studio, we've got Gabe working on that, that color cup. You can see that the outside of that bubble form is white. We have a layer of yellow on the inside and then clear on top of that, or inside of that rather. You'll notice from time to time today that Eden will open up the door to that crucible and take our squirt gun. Essentially what she's doing is super chilling the little bubbles that have moved to the surface of the glass inside that crucible, and by spraying them with that water, it super chills them, allows them to crack, and then they're melted back into the glass. It's incredibly important that we do that on a regular basis to keep little bubbles from being included in the surface of our glass forms. So here at the center bench, we're out of that rewarming chamber, continuing to roll that colored bar around the clear bubble that Ben is working on. And then here on the left-hand side of the studio, we continue to watch this bubble, let it set up in preparation for our next step. All right, on the left-hand side of the studio, we've let that white bubble that Gabe has been babysitting set up. That's a good indicator, in much the same way we did in the center bench, that bubble is going to have a layer of glass added to the outside. In this case, we've added a layer of clear. And then with the tip of that blowpipe, we've stripped off all the excess clear glass into the silver bucket on the floor, where it will cool down and be recycled back into our crucibles. Now, from time to time, when the pipes get really hot, we'll run those pipes through a cooler. It's nothing more than a water bath. Cools down that pipe, allows us to move our unprotected hands closer to the glass objects in which we're working, and ultimately makes it a lot easier to carry those 30-pound objects attached to that big metal stick around the hot shop a whole lot easier. Now that Gabe is done in that pipe cooler, we've gotten back to the bench, and he's using a wooden tool called the block to shape up the outside of that bubble form. That block, similar to a number of the other tools that we use, are made out of a fruit wood, usually either cherry or apple. And the reason that we use woods, even though it seems kind of contrary to what would be rational thought here, wooden objects getting close to 1,000 degrees tend to burn up. But the wood does a wonderful thing for us in that it absorbs the moisture from the water in the buckets behind our artists. And when the hot glass comes within close proximity of that moisture, it provides a bubble of steam on which our glass forms reside. That bubble of steam allows us to shape and finish the surface of the glass without leaving behind any surface marks or metal tooling. And ultimately leaves us with that super shiny, glassy finish that we're so used to seeing. So at the center bench, Ben let that colored bubble set up for a while. He gained that structural integrity he talked about. Now he's going back into the left side crucible, add another layer of clear glass to the outside of that bubble form. And with that, we're going to get back to the center bench and continue to shape it up. Going to use that wooden tool we talked about not long ago called the block. And then here on the left side, we've got that, that cup form that's being created. Very deep into the rewarming chamber right now.
Hi. So I'm just going to say a few words about this technique. It's a Swedish technique that's called Graal. And it was invented in an old factory in Sweden called Orrefors by actually one glassblower that was called Knut Bergqvist. And he was like this genius glassblower in the early 1900s in Sweden. And he worked at the Orrefors, and he also tried to, they made overlay glass in France and other places in Europe. But then Knut Bergqvist, he tried to take those overlay cups that he made and engrave on them and make patterns on them. And in the same year, a famous artist came and a designer to this Orrefors factory, and they become friends. And his name was Simon Gate. So Gate and Bergqvist started to experiment, and they became friends and starting to have fun together and have a beer with each other and talking about glass. And then they said, maybe we can use this cameo like overlay technique to engrave or do patterns on them and then reheat them again and pick them up and blow them up again. So they tried it then in 1916, and the first Graal was blown then in Sweden. So after that, it became a huge success for that glassworks, Orrefors, the Graal technique. So it's a long history, and I've been taking that technique and made it my own for 20 years now. So this is like the start, the first step of the Graal, to make the blank. So that's what we're doing. So you decide what color you want to use and what color you want to work in. And then you have to see, you're going to see now what we're doing. Thank you.
You notice here at the center bench that Ben has picked up that tool we call the papers. It is exactly that. It's a stack of newspaper folded up 5, 7, 9 times, soaked in water. And it provides the same type of characteristics that the wooden tools behind our artist provide, in so much as it gives us that nice cushion of steam for our glass form to ride on. The nice thing about the papers is that it allows us to target specific areas of our form we can cool down and shape. that we otherwise couldn't do using a more rigid tool. And just like we talked about here on the left-hand side of the studio, back on the right, we've got Nick Davis, one of the Museum of Glass team, running that pipe through the pipe cooler, again, making it easier for our artists to put their hands closer to that glass form. Makes it a lot easier to carry that 30-pound hunk of glass around the hot shop studio floor. A little more shaping with those papers. And here on the left-hand side, Gabe has gone back into that crucible. Remember, 1,000 pounds of liquid glass at 2,100 degrees. Added a layer of clear to the outside on the bubble form he's carrying, and then hanging it vertically, he strips off all of the excess glass into that bucket. Once that glass has cooled down, we can chunk it up and throw it back into our crucibles so we can use it later. All right, so moving from the center bench to the left-hand side crucible, Ben has been babysitting that bubble for a while, letting it set up. And now he's gone back into that crucible for another layer of clear glass. No strip gather this time. We're going to keep all of that clear glass on the end of the pipe. Back to the bench. Using that block, we're going to shape up the outside of it and continue to watch that form evolve. Here on the left-hand side of the studio, we got Gabe very deep in that rewarming chamber with his bubble form as well. We're working on the timing of these two pieces so that we can bring them together. So as we discussed not long ago, Nick Davis has moved back off to the right-hand side of the studio and is running the pipe through the pipe cooler. Once he's happy with how chilled that thing has become, we'll get it back into the center rewarming station. And here on the left-hand side of the studio, we continue to watch this color cup evolve and be used in the Swedish overlay technique. So here at the center bench, look at that big glass bubble form. You can really appreciate how much clear glass is on the outside of that colored bubble, so deep in there. Told by the time these two pieces are ready to be taken off the pipe and put away for the evening, we'll be looking at about 25 to 30 pounds of glass on the end of those pipes. Over on the left-hand side of the studio, we're continuing to babysit that cup form. We've also added a constriction off the end of our blowpipe. And that constriction is called a jack line, and that will serve as the location where we'll add a little bit of water and break that bubble cup away from the form, or excuse me, away from the pipe that Gabe is currently sitting with. Little discussion between the two benches to decide whether or not we are ready to do that. So here in the center bench, you notice that we've added a set of rollers to our arms of our bench. It's a good indicator of how heavy that piece of glass is and how heavy it's going to become. At some point, it becomes a little more difficult to roll it back and forth across the arms. So we have added those rollers. We can continue to roll that form back and forth, keep it in the same spot without moving forward and backward on those arms. Once our artist in the center bench is happy with both the temperature and the size of his object, how long it's set up, we'll bring this color overlay to do our, or this color cup to do our Swedish overlay. Getting deep into that rewarming chamber, imparting a little more thermal energy for an all-over flash heat, and then focusing the energy of that rewarming chamber right at the very end to get it nice and hot and tacky so it will stick to the bubble form in our center bench. So one of the techniques that we use to remove our glass objects from the pipes on which they are created is by adding a little bit of water to a constriction point. Those drops of water chill the surface of the glass, creating surface cracks. And then with a quick tap of our tool, those surface cracks vibrate and are sent through that constriction area, separating one form from the pipe, leaving it on the other. We'll see if that's the same technique that they're going to use to separate this Swedish overlay cup onto the form that's currently sitting in the center bench. I'm going to make sure that both of these objects' axes are spinning appropriately. Really pushing that cup down and around the outside. There's Ben with the water, creating those surface cracks. A quick tap of the pipe separates that. And they're able to continue shaping that up. They'll get it back into the rewarming chamber, impart some of that thermal energy into the now coldest portion of our glass form. Once they're happy with the heat, they'll get it back to the bench, continue shaping it up, and rolling that colored cup back around the outside of that bubble form that we've been working on. All right, now Ben has gone back to using that tool called the jacks to open up that color cup. Opening that that former connection point ever so slightly, making sure that the temperatures are right, and that as we do the Swedish overlay, we are not including any bubbles in the surface between those layers of glass. Back into that 2,300 degree rewarming chamber for a little more thermal energy. So the question down here in front was, how do our artists know, ballpark, the temperature of the glass items that we're working on? That's the artistry part. It's a combination of knowing the glass, understanding how long it's been outside the rewarming chamber, the colors that you see as the glass is cooling down. And then one of the other really important aspects of that keeping our glass items up to temperature is that connection point in between our glass form and the blowpipe on which it sits. Now that connection point is called the moil, and the moil needs to stay above about 1,000 degrees or it will crack and then we'll lose all of our hard work. So from time to time, they will either put the glass form all the way back into the rewarming chamber, or they'll use that large torch you see burning behind the bench. That torch runs at about 2,800 degrees up to 4,000 degrees. And again, we're just focusing thermal energy into our glass forms when we're using that. So back to the bench, continuing to roll this color cup around the outside of our bubble form. This technique is called the Swedish overlay technique. It differs from the standard overlay technique in so much as standard overlays use a color bubble, and we take another bubble on the end of a pipe and stick it into that cup, adding the layer to the outside. In this particular case, we've created that cup inverted. We've attached it to the end, and now we're rolling it around the outside of this Graal form. Back to the marvering table. That marvering table is stainless steel. Historically, it's been made out of marble. But in other glass studios around the country, you will see stainless steel, brass, marble, lots of different materials that those tables are made out of. And with that roll on the marver, I'm going to go back into the rewarming chamber for some more thermal energy. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk to you about our visiting artist this week. His name is Peter Hermansson. He's a Swedish glass master. He's highly regarded for his contemporary use of traditional Graal and aerial techniques. Following his formal studies at the Orrefors National Glass School, Hermansson spent 2 decades developing a graphically expressive graffiti style. Notably, Hermansson's unique graphic illustrations are transferred into the surface of his glass vessels through an etching technique, creating a power visual narrative. Peter will be working in the hop shop from July 1st through the 5th. And if you're interested in learning more about the artist, you can stop by for the artist talk on Sunday from 1 to 2, or check him out online at peterhermansson.com and on Instagram at Hermansson_P. Now the form that they're working on is called a Graal blank. Once this item has been deemed complete, we will create a jack line. We'll separate it from the pipe and we'll put it away into one of our annealing ovens. We have 4 of them here on the hot shop floor, 2 large ones underneath either side of the ramps, and then we have 2 top loading silver boxes here close to the audience. The internal temperature of those annealers sits at about 1,000 degrees, and when we leave for the evening, we hit a button on the brain box on the side and it moves that 1,000 degree internal temperature down to room temperature over the course of a number of hours. These Graal forms are fairly simple, so we can expect to see them come out of those annealing ovens comfortably by tomorrow afternoon. Again, you notice our center bench here. Ben Cobb is currently using that stack of papers to cool the outside of that bubble form. Shape it up, bring it in line with what our artist wants to see at the end of the day. And there Ben goes with that torch we call the fluffy torch. Pushing more of that thermal energy into the skin of the form, that Graal form. Making sure that we tend to that moil and then get it back into the rewarming chamber for another all-over flash heat. You notice Ben has picked up that tool called the jacks, making that constriction that we talked about, called the jack line. That jack line, again, will be the location from which we will separate this Graal form from the blowpipe on which it sits. All right, here on the left-hand side of the studio, we've got Aiden and Nick working out of the crucible. Nick has gone in for a gather of clear glass on the end of that solid rod. Nick will be creating a sculptural tool called a punty. Essentially, we're going to take this solid pipe and we're going to attach it to the end of the form that is currently sitting on the pipe in the center bench. Looks like we're going to add a small cookie of clear glass so that when we get this into our annealing oven, it will stand up straight. So there's the addition of that glass. And then we'll use paddles and a couple of other tools to shape that into a nice flat cookie, or a footer on which this Graal form will stand up. With the initial shape of that footer happy, we're going to put the entire object back into that rewarming chamber, get an all over heat, and then focus the thermal energy right where the artist wants it. So again, here at the center bench, you notice that Ben is using that fluffy torch, paying attention to the connection point between the blowpipe and our Graal form. Again, we have to keep that connection point, that moil, as it's called. We have to keep it above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or we risk having it crack and ultimately losing all of the hard work on the other end of that blowpipe. All right, so on the left, Nick has created a punty. We're going to use that punty on that solid rod to attach to the base of this Graal form. And then using the knockoff technique we saw earlier, Ben will reach behind him into those buckets, grab a few drops of water, and add those to the constriction point, or the jack line off the end of his blowpipe. And once he's happy with the connection between Nick's punty and the Graal form, he'll tap that pipe And the surface cracks created by the water on that jack line will go all the way through the constriction, leaving the pipe on the punty, or excuse me, leaving the form on the punty that Nick is currently holding. So that cookie there on the end of that Graal form does a couple of things. Not only does it allow us to stand that item up, but it also protects the colored glass that's underneath it. Here comes your water technique. A couple of drops there right on that constriction point. A quick tap of the tool. All right, congratulations, guys. And then back into the rewarming chamber to move the coldest portion of that glass into the deepest portions of that rewarming station. Once they're happy with the thermal energy that's in that Graal form, we'll get it back to the bench and continue to shape it up. Again, we see Ben using that fluffy torch, 2,800 to 4,000 degrees, depending upon the mix. And focus a lot of that thermal energy right into the break-off that we just created. Gonna melt all that crunchy glass into the surface, smooth things up, and when we're happy, we'll make sure that our artists here on the studio floor have the protective equipment on, and then we'll get that Graal form into the annealing oven. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, that annealing oven, we've got 4 of them, 1 on either side underneath the ramps, and then 2 top-loading ones here on the floor. Those sit at about 900 to 1,000 degrees for the time that we're here working in the shop. Now that keeps the glass items hot enough to be in a ready state and to be safe, but not so cold as to keep them liquidy and malleable. When we leave at the end of the day, we push a button on the brain box on the side of those annealers, and it moves that 1,000-degree temperature down to room temperature over the course of about 20 hours in our particular case, much longer in others. But tomorrow afternoon, if all goes well, we should be able to see some of these items being taken out of the annealers, being ready and prepared for work in the cold shop. Now you notice that we have to keep the all-over surface temperature of the glass pretty high, so we get back into the rewarming chamber for what we call a flash heat, an all-over heat to the skin, and then we pull out the Graal form, and we use the blowtorch characteristics or properties of that rewarming chamber to focus the thermal energy right at the very end of that Graal. You see Ben is using some tweezers to pull out the underlying layer. It looks like we're going to get ready to trim that excess off and then flame polish what's left behind once the shears are done doing their work. You notice Ben here at the center bench has picked up those duck-billed shears, different from normal shears, and that they turn out towards the tips. Allows us to get a little bit deeper and to cut a lot more effectively on that, that hot glass. And Nick is focusing that thermal energy right towards the end of that, that Graal form. With it, that we'll get back to the center bench, and Ben, it looks like he's getting ready to trim off the excess. There we go, those duck-billed shears. So there we go, deep into that rewarming chamber for an all-over heat. And then back to the center bench to continue shaping up that Graal form. All right, so a little discussion about what's going to happen next here at the center bench. Peter sounds like he's very happy with the form that Graal has taken thus far. And between Ben, Gabe, and Peter, they're talking about how they're going to knock this piece away and store it for the evening. You notice Ben has picked up and is using that fluffy torch again to give us a little bit more thermal energy right there at the moil. You got to keep that moil above 1,000 degrees as we discussed, otherwise it will crack and we will lose everything off the end of that. And then over on the right-hand side of the studio, Gabe is getting his protective equipment on so that he can box up and put away this Graal form for the evening. In a similar technique to what we've seen before, we're going to use that water drop technique. Apply those water drops to the constriction point right off the end of that punty that Nick is rolling back and forth. And then using our tool, we will tap the surface, or we will tap the pipe itself. The surface cracks created by the water drops will go all the way through that constriction point, leaving the Graal form in Ben's hands. Once we've successfully knocked away this piece and are getting ready to box it up for the evening, that's a great time for a round of applause. But we'll withhold until we get to that point. All right, there we go with the application of those water drops. And a quick tap of that tool. And a big round of applause. All right, like I said, off to the right-hand side annealer to be put away for the evening. Again, that annealer's internal temperature is about 1,000 degrees, and it will stay there until we go home today. Folks, we're going to go ahead and do a 5 or 10 minute reset. We'll get back to making another one of these color cups, or Graal blanks as they're called. Once we've done that, then we're going to take a lunch break and finish out the rest of the day. So if you want to take a quick break, back here in about 10 minutes or so, and we'll get started with the next Graal. All right, folks, welcome back. If you'll bear with me, I'll tell you a little bit here about our visiting artist, Peter Hermansson. Peter Hermansson is a Swedish glass master who is highly regarded for his contemporary use of traditional Graal and aerial techniques. Graal is what we're working on today. Following the formal studies at Orrefors National Glass School, Hermansson spent 2 decades developing a graphically expressive graffiti style. Notably, Hermansson's unique illustrations are transferred into the surface of his glass vessels through an etching technique, creating powerful visual narrative. Peter will be working in the hot shop from July 1st through the 5th, and he will be presenting an artist talk this Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. here in the hot shop. If you're interested in learning more about Peter, you can find him online at peterhermansson.com or on Instagram at Hermansson_P. Folks, if you have any questions on what's happening here on the hot shop floor, my name is Jeremy. Just raise your hand, ask the question. I'll do everything that I can to answer it for you. All right. Today we are working on these Graal techniques, or these Graals, as I noted earlier. Now, these Graals are about 25 to 30 pounds a piece. You can see a couple of examples of them in their not quite finished form here on the table. These, now that they have been sandblasted and etched to expose the other colors lying underneath, these will then be heated up on another day and then inflated into a much larger bubble form. This afternoon, or this morning, on our second iteration, building one of these Graal blanks, rather than using a single solid color in the underlayment, we're going to mix a bunch of colors together so that when the surface of the Graal is etched, we'll have a multicolored piece that we can display. On the right-hand side, here in our center bench, we've got one of our museum team members, Ben Cobb. He's working on adding color to a clear bubble. That clear bubble will serve as the base layer for everything else that we're going to add to the outside. Here on the left-hand side, we're preparing color bar, getting it nice and hot, making sure that it's nice and liquidy. We're going to add the colored bubble, or the colored bar, to the outside of a couple of other clear bubbles. Add a number of layers of clear glass. Refine that shape and then bring them together here at the center bench using a technique called a Swedish overlay. We'll describe that as we go through it. Now, to my left, this big silver box here, this is called garage. Our garage is similar to the garage that you have at home in that we keep all our spare pieces and parts in there. In this particular case, we have colored bar in trays that are being warmed up, being brought up to a nice hot workable temperature. So that's what we're working on here, is picking up those color pieces so that we can get them into our rewarming chambers, make them all nice and liquidy so that that liquid color will flow around the outside of the clear bubbles. Now, if you're just joining us, we'll talk through some of the equipment that we have here on the hot shop floor. These large glowing circles, we've got 2 of them active this morning. We have a third one on the right side of the studio. Those are called G-holes, glory holes, or rewarming stations. For obvious reasons, I am going to go with rewarming station. You can see on the diagram that inside that rewarming station there is no liquid glass. It's just lined with thermal fire brick, and it runs on forced air and natural gas at about 2,300 degrees for the duration of the time we're here in the studio. Now, if you contrast that with our crucibles, we have 2 of them here on the hot shop floor, one on either side of the center bench, those big silver tubs. Now, those crucibles hold 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees 24/7. We never shut them off. We keep them running all the time. see what's going to happen from this side. If you want to switch to the other side, you'll have a much better view in that side of the bench. Yeah, yeah. I just don't want. Here at the center bench, we've got Ben rolling that bubble form back and forth, excuse me, back and forth across that big steel table called the marver. That marver historically has been made out of marble, but in our particular case, we've got stainless steel tables. And other various glass studios around the world, you can see a number of different materials used to make those marvers. You've seen brass, copper, stainless steel, and marble. Here at the center bench, our hot shop lead, Ben, is using that metal tool called the jacks to shape up the outside of that bubble form and cool it down in the appropriate places. So here at the center bench, we see this bubble being tended to. The reason we're doing that is we're letting out the outside shell, the skin of that bubble, set up, develop a little more structural integrity, so that when we go back into our crucible to add another layer of clear glass to the outside, the bubble that we've already created does not lose its shape or get distorted by the heat or the pressure of the new glass being added to it. With Ben happy with that temperature, we're going to go back into the crucible, add another layer of clear to the outside of it. We call this technique going to get a gather, or adding a gather of hot glass to our bubble forms. And with that layer of clear, we're going to get back to the center bench and we're going to shape it up. Now you've noticed that Ben has reached behind him and he's using that wooden tool called the block. That wooden tool is soaked in water intentionally, and the moisture in those the fibers of that fruit wood that the block is created out of, once the hot glass comes within close proximity, it creates a layer of steam. That layer of steam provides a nice soft bed for our glass forms to ride on and allows us to shape them up without leaving behind any unsightly tool marks in the surface of that glass form, leaving it perfectly shiny. Over on the right-hand side of the studio, we noticed that Ben has moved to what we call the pipe cooler. But from time to time, here in the hot shop, it gets really uncomfortable to move that pipe and those glass objects around. So we run the pipe through a cooler, allows us to get our hand a little bit closer to the hot glass at the end of that rod, makes it a lot easier for us to carry these objects around the floor. It's particularly important today because these Graals are coming in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 pounds a piece. So here at the center bench, Ben is going to continue to sit on that bubble, letting it set up, get some of that structural integrity into the skin that we talked about. Meanwhile, here in our left-hand bench, we're working on a couple of different things. Color application, we're working on a sculptural tool that Gabe is currently creating. We've had some color added to that little punty, and now we are heating it up, and we are going to inflate it, put a small bubble in it, and add another layer of colored glass to the outside. Here in the left crucible, Nick Davis has gone in and is grabbing a gather of glass on the end of that solid rod. He's going to shape that up. And it looks like he's going to get back into this garage here and do a quick stab up of some color. All right, from the center bench, Ben has moved back to the left side crucible and is going to add another gather of clear over the outside of that bubble form he's been tending to. I'm going to see him go back into that crucible between 3 and maybe 6 times today, depending upon the size of the object that that Peter is desiring. And then back here on our left-hand bench, Gabe is now inflating a small bubble, tending to the small bubble of colored glass. We'll have another layer of glass added to the outside of that. And eventually we'll move it back here to the center bench where these two forms will be brought together. All right, here on the left side of the studio, we've got Gabe continuing to work on that bubble form that he's been tending to. And Nick has returned from the garage with that additional color, and he's getting it back into that rewarming chamber, moving it back to the marver, back and forth, imparting that thermal energy and shaping it so that it will apply to our bubble forms as we want it to. All right, from the center bench, Ben has moved back off to the right-hand side to run his blowpipe through that pipe cooler. And here on the left-hand side, we continue to sit and tend to this bubble and let it set up a little bit before we add another layer to the outside. Folks, the question was, what are these blowpipes and rods made out of? Very simple. The answer is stainless steel. Stainless steel is a notoriously poor conductor of heat and thermal energy, and so we capitalize on those properties in order to protect our hands and other objects from the heat of the glass on the end of that pipe. All right, so some very hot color bar being presented to the bubble form at the chair here in the center bench. Peter's adding one layer of color to the outside of that bubble form in an irregular pattern. And here on the left-hand side of the studio, we continue to tend to these bubbles, making sure that the forms are exactly what they should be before we add them to the center bench. With that color application here at the center, Ben has taken that Graal form deep into the rewarming chamber to heat up and liquefy all that glass that we've just added. We'll get it back to the bench and continue shaping that form. And on the left-hand side, we're going to continue working that Swedish overlay cup with Ben and Eden. Excuse me, with Gabe and Eden. In that center bench, you notice that Ben was rolling that Graal form back and forth across the marburing table to press that additional color that we've just added into the surface. You tend to that bubble just a little bit more while Peter heats up another set of color and getting ready to add that to the outside of the Graal. So back at the center bench, we've got another application of color to the outside of this Graal form. And with the addition of those pieces, we're back into the rewarming chamber to impart some more of that thermal energy. Again, those rewarming chambers run at 2,300 degrees for the time that we're here in the studio. They run on forced air and natural gas. We can contrast those, compare those with our crucibles. Again, we have two crucibles here on the hot shop floor. Each crucible holds about 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees, and those run 24/7. So here we are back at the center bench with Peter rolling those color applications into the surface of that Graal blank. And then on the left-hand side of the studio, we've got three artists working very intently to add color to the outside of the Swedish overlays and prepare additional colors for application on this Graal form. All right, so here in the left bench, we've got 2 layers of color on this bubble that Gabe is currently sitting. Nick is heating up the last application of white to be added to the outside of that bubble form. We'll see that done here very shortly. Back into the rewarming chamber for some more thermal energy in that color before we present it back to Gabe for application. And then here at the center bench, Peter continues to work adding those color bits into the Graal form, using the marvering table to really press those into the surface of the blank form that he created a little earlier. Right here on the left-hand side, we can see that Gabe has inverted his bubble and is waiting on Nick to return from the rewarming station so we can add the white to the outside of this bubble form. And moving a little bit to the right, we've got Eden here working out of the garage, picking up another layer of color. And here at our center bench, we've got Peter tending to that bubble. We've got Ben heating up another color application. It looks like we'll be adding that to the Graal blank very, very shortly. And on the left-hand side, we've added that white to the outside of the bubble form that Gabe was tending. And he'll use a collection of tools that he's got there at the center bench to continue shaping that up before we bring it and present it here. Excuse me, at the left bench before we present it to the center bench for addition to the outside. Back at the center bench, looks like Peter is waiting for another color application coming from Ben. He's got that color bar deep in that center rewarming station. And when we get it up to appropriate temperature, we'll present it back here to the center bench. Peter will tack it to the surface of his Graal form, and using the diamond shears, he'll cut away any that he doesn't want on there. Color applied, Peter goes back into that center rewarming station, to grab some thermal energy on those newly applied glass bits. Once we get it up to temperature, we'll get it back to the marvering table, roll it back and forth, continue to press those new color additions into the skin of that Graal blank. Here in the left bench, we have successfully created that overlay. We're tending to the bubble right now, letting it set up so we have some structural integrity. When we go back into the crucible and add another layer of clear glass to the outside of that. Happen here shortly, but we're going to let that bubble set up a bit more before we go in. Here in the center bench, out of the rewarming station, back and forth across the marvering table again, pressing all of that newly added glass color into the surface of that Graal form. It looks like the left-hand side is just about there with the timing on their color bubble. Shortly, Nick is going to open that door for Gabe. Gabe is going to push that bubble deep into that glass in our crucible. Again, 1,000 pounds of glass inside that thing. Runs at 2,100 degrees 24/7. With the addition of that glass, Gabe is going to get back to the left-hand bench. After he makes a quick stop off at the pipe cooler. And from time to time, when those glass objects get really hot and the pipes are uncomfortable for us to carry around, we run those pipes through the water bath called the pipe cooler. Brings them down to a nice workable temperature. It allows us to get our hands that much closer to the hot glass on which we're working. Makes it easier to carry these 30-pound objects around the hot shop floor. And with that, Gabe has reached down and he's picked up one of those wooden tools we called the blocks we talked about earlier. And he's going to continue to shape the outside of that overlay. And when the time is right, he'll present it back here at the center bench. And that's going to be a bit. The center bench continues to heat and press those colors into the surface of the Graal. So here at the center bench, we can see that Ben has reached down and is using a tool called the papers to shape and cool the outside of that bubble form. And we call them papers because they are exactly that. It's a newspaper folded up between 5 and 7, 8, 9 times-ish, soaked in water. And in a similar manner to the wooden tools that we keep in the buckets behind our benches, these papers provide a cushion of steam for our glass forms to rest on while we shape them. Again, that cushion of steam provides that super shiny, glossy, glassy finish that we're used to seeing, and avoids leaving behind any chill marks or tooling in the surface of those bubble forms. On the left-hand side, Gabe is going back into the crucible for another layer of clear over the outside of that overlay cup that he's holding. You notice he's twisting it back and forth inside the crucible. That glass has got the consistency of honey, and rolling it around or twisting that form inside there allows us to capitalize on the viscosity of that material. Scoop it up ever so gently. And then we get back to the bench, again using those wooden tools, in particular the wooden tool called the block, to refine the outside of that bubble form. Yes. So as discussed earlier, Nick has taken that extremely hot pipe off to the right-hand side of the hot shop floor, running it through that pipe cooler, make it a little easier for us to get our hands closer to the glass item in which we're working, and it makes carrying these large glass objects around the hot shop floor a much easier task. I'd like to welcome all of our new attendees just walked in. For your edification, we'll talk about our visiting artist today. Peter Hermansson is a Swedish glassmaster who's highly regarded for his contemporary use of traditional Graal and aerial techniques. Following his formal studies at the Orrefors National Glass School, Hermansson has spent 2 decades developing a graphically expressive graffiti style. Notably, Hermansson's unique graphic illustrations are transferred into the surface of his glass vessels through an etching technique, creating a powerful visual narrative. Peter will be working here in the Hot Shop July 1st through the 5th, and will be presenting an artist talk on Sunday, July 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. If you're interested in learning more about Peter, you can find him online at peterhermansson.com and on Instagram at Hermansson_P. Over on the left-hand side of the studio, we've got that color overlay that Gabe has been working on. We've now added a constriction to that form just off the end of the blowpipe. That constriction will serve as the break-off location when we get ready to transfer this to the blank in the center bench. But before we do that, we'll get back into the rewarming chambers for another all-over heat. And then back here in the center bench, we continue to tend that Graal form, letting it set up just a little bit. Again, constantly rotating it back and forth along those the arms of that bench, making sure that everything continues to spin on axis. Ben has gone into that left side crucible for another layer of clear on the outside of that Graal form. And here in the left bench, Gabe continues to tend to that overlay that he's working on. Currently using a paper to cool the outside of that bubble form. All right, folks, it looks like we're getting ready to add our overlay cup to the outside of the Graal form here at the center bench. On the left-hand side, Gabe is making sure that that overlay form is up to temperature and the right size. Doing the same thing here at the center bench, getting ready to apply the color to the outside of the Graal form. Now that all the action has moved back here to the center bench, we notice that Ben is continuing to tend to that bubble form while Gabe gets into and out of the rewarming chamber with that overlay. All right, looks like we're moving forward on this piece. The technique you're going to see here, once we get this overlay presented to the center bench, we'll be using some drops of water to create some surface cracks in the constriction off the end of the pipe. It's currently in the rewarming chamber. Those surface cracks will then be used to transect the entire constriction. The way we're going to do that is the artist in the bench will reach behind him, grab a couple of drops of water with those tongs, with the tweezers, and he will lay those into the constriction, again creating those surface cracks. With a wrap of his tool on the back side of that, those surface cracks will transect the entire constriction, leaving the overlay on the pipe and the Graal form that is currently in the center bench. Quick smash. We've added those together. Here come the water drops. There you go. And with that, we will take the Graal form as it sits. We'll get it back on the yoke, deep into that rewarming chamber. Remember, folks, that rewarming chamber runs at about 2,300 degrees for the time that we are here in the studio. There is no liquid glass currently in that rewarming chamber. It runs on forced air and natural gas and serves as a means for us to impart thermal energy into our forms that we're working. Now we compare that to the crucibles that we have, two of them here on the floor, those large silver tubs on either side of that rewarming station. Each of those crucibles holds 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees. For 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Using the tool called the jacks, we're going to continue to modify the opening in the end of that overlay, opening it up ever so slightly. Once we're happy with that, we're going to get it back into the rewarming chamber for some more thermal energy. You can see here at the center bench that Ben is now using a wooden bladed tool called a parchofes. They're similar to those jacks. And now he is upscaled to a custom made tool brought to us by Peter. He uses at his studio back home in Sweden. You can see that constant dance back and forth between the center bench and that rewarming station. Make sure that we have a proper amount of thermal energy in our glass form.
Yes, very.
You see the artist in our center bench, Ben, is using that metal tool called the jacks to create a constriction off the end of that blowpipe. That constriction, or the jack line as it's also known, will serve as the portion of the glass form that we will use to break away and create an opening in the surface of, or in the top of. We've got to get that jack line in nice and deep so that when we come to break that Graal form away, the water drop technique we used earlier will work properly. We see that Ben is using the paper to really chill the surface and set the dimensions of the outside of this Graal form. A lot of discussion between the bench and the artist. So here at the center bench, we've got Nick coming back, presenting a gather of glass to Ben. They're going to make a small cookie at the bottom of this Graal. Going to apply that hot glass, and break it away, and then with the other tools we've got there in the bench, we're going to continue to shape up that cookie, or the footer on which this Graal will sit. Now you notice that Ben is using that large torch. We call it a fluffy torch. He's paying close attention to the connection point between the blowpipe and the Graal form. That connection point is called the moil, and that moil needs to stay above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or we run the risk of cracking it and losing all of our work on the opposite end of it. So from time to time, our artist will use that torch. It gets up to roughly 2,800 to 4,000 degrees, depending upon the mixture. Gives us a little more thermal energy in that connection point, and allows us to keep our hard work where it needs to be. So while our artists here in the center bench continue to tend to the Graal form, over on the left-hand side of the studio, Nick is making a punty device that will serve as a connection to the bottom portion of this Graal form when we get ready to knock it away and refine the opening at the top. So he's in the rewarming chamber, making sure that that punty is up to temperature. Here in the center bench, we're maintaining the temperature in the skin of that Graal form. In a similar way to what we saw earlier, we're going to attach that to the bottom and using a couple of drops of water just off the end of the blowpipe on which that Graal form resides. Ben's going to add some water to that constriction, or that jack line as we've called it in the past. And with a tap of his tool, we'll separate that object and leaving it on the punty rod that Nick has just attached to the bottom. Here comes the water drops on that jack line. And with that, the coldest portion of that Graal form is now the furthest away from the artist, has been pushed deep into that rewarming chamber. We'll continue to shape up and refine the opening of that Graal before we put it away for the evening. And with the artist happy about the connection between the new punty and the Graal form, we get the coldest part of that glass form back into the rewarming chamber. Again, 2,300 degrees. Once we're happy with the thermal energy in there, we'll get it back to the center bench where we'll continue to refine that shape. We see here the center bench that Ben is using that fluffy torch, paying attention to that connection point, making sure that that moil doesn't drop below that 1,000-degree threshold, and preparing the skin of this object for when we get ready to break it off and put it away into our annealing ovens for the evening. Now we have these annealing ovens. We've got 4 of them, one on either side of the hot shop underneath the ramp, and then a couple of floor loading silver boxes here. The internal temperature of those annealers is set to around 950 to 1,000 degrees, and it runs at that temperature until we get ready to go home for the day, and then we push a button on the brain box on the side, and it brings that 1,000 degrees down to room temperature over the course of the evening. So tomorrow afternoon, we should be able to see these items coming out of the annealer, ready for phase 2 of their preparation. We see here with Gabe getting his protective equipment on, making sure that his arms are protected. He'll be putting on his gloves here very soon. And then moving off to the far right-hand side of the studio once that object has been broken away from the punty rod on which it sits. With the face shield on, the jacket and the gloves, that's a good indicator that we are moments away from having this piece put away. Once the artists in the center bench have successfully knocked that piece away, leaving it in Gabe's hands, it'd be a great time for a large round of applause for all the technical skill that they've shown. And again, Gabe will get that Graal form put away in the annealing oven, and we should be able to see it tomorrow afternoon if everything goes as planned. All right, using that water drop technique that we saw earlier, I'm going to apply a few drops to that constriction line, that jack line off the end of the moil. With a tap. All right, there we go. Beautifully done. Let's hear it for the Hot Shop team, folks. All right, and with that, we'll be putting away for the duration of lunch. We should be back in about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. If you'd like to join us in the hot shop, then.